take the piece of paper that you've been guarding so carefully, and I want you to tear it into 8 pieces. Neatness does not count, but speed does. All right, quit that folding and start tearing. 8 pieces. And you'll need your pencil and something else to write with, and something in your lap if you can make it. All right, you've all got 8 pieces of paper. I'm going to ask you to write on these pieces of paper, and no one will see what you write. So feel free to be truthful with yourselves. Now listen, on each of these pieces of paper, I want you to write down one different thing that you think you are. And don't write down your profession. One different thing that you think you are. And at first you're all going to say, oh, I'm a mother. That's fine if you're a mother. If you're a father, don't write that. You certainly are into relationships. You are somebody's mother, sister, daughter, and it's perfectly all right to write that down. But don't forget that in addition to being somebody's relative, you are also many other things. Are you a cook? Are you a chauffeur? Are you a listener? You are many things, so get busy. 8 things that you think you are. And no fair asking your neighbor, quick, tell me something that I am. You know, I did this exercise at a medical school not too long ago with some of the new students who were graduating. And after the class, I very idly just picked up a piece of paper and opened it and read it. And on it, one of those students had written, adulterer. Did my best to find out where he was sitting. Couldn't do it. Having written down these 8 things that you've said you are, I want you to put them in the order of importance. Now, having once put them in order, just leave them in that order. Don't change it around, because your first instinct is probably right. Now, I want you to look at what you have written that you have said is of the least importance. The thing that you've written that says you think is the least important thing that you are. And I want you to think about what you've written and why. For instance, if you wrote down on here that you're a cook, I want you to think about what cooking means to you, and if it's the least important, you obviously don't care about it much. But think about what being a cook means to you. Think about how your kitchen looks when you go in to start. Think about what your family's going to say when you serve it up. And then crumple it up and throw it away. And then go on to the next least important thing that you've said you are. And again, please think about why you wrote it and crumple it up and throw it away. And on to the next least important thing that you've said you are. This is partly what it's like to be dying. When you're dying, you give up the least important things in your life first. And it isn't too hard in the beginning. If you never really liked to cook, maybe, it's just as well. You always wanted to stay out of the kitchen anyway. But this third thing that you've said you are, think about why you wrote it and crumple it up and throw it away. And on to the next least important thing. And when you're dying, time begins to speed up. You don't have as much time to think about what you're giving up. It's taken away from you without your consent sometimes. So look at what you wrote and think, I'll never do or be this thing again, and crumple it up and throw it away. And it's getting more difficult now, because we are coming to the things that you have said are important, the things that you are. And go on to the next one and look at what you wrote and crumple it up and throw it away. Because when you're dying, you have no choice. You can't continue to be or do these things. This is what dying people lie and think about in bed. And for you nurses who go into this grouchy old woman who you just hate to go in the room, try to remind yourself, what did she give up today? But look at the third most important thing that you've said you are. And when you're dying, it'll be taken away from you. So crumple it up and throw it away. And it's really getting tough now, because you're down to the two most important things that you've said you are. If you've written on this next piece of paper, for instance, that you're somebody's mother, what are your thoughts when you know that by this time next week you're not going to be anybody's mother? Has there been time for you to prepare this child for your passing? Do you feel secure about what's going to happen to this child when you're no longer on this earth? If you're the mother of a daughter, who's going to help her with her wedding? Who's going to see to it that she marries a good man? Who's going to advise her if she's in the wrong company? But when you're dying, you know it won't be you. So crumple it up and throw it away. And now you're down to the most important thing that you've said you are. And even this is to be taken away from you. If on this you've written that you're somebody's wife, have you been the kind of wife who's been saying, promise you'll never remarry, don't let anybody else use my silver? Or have you been the kind of wife who has been able to say, find somebody nice for yourself and for my children. Find a good mother for my children. Make up your quarrel with whoever you've quarreled with for my sake. Let me know that all's going to be peaceful after I've gone. Are you going to be strong enough to say, try not to grieve for me too much. Grieve for me a little, but go on living. Will you be strong enough to say that if you were faced with this? Because this is what dying people face. When they've got the awful news that they're not going to get better and their bodies are giving them the message every day that they're getting worse, when they can no longer get the liquid up into the straw, into their mouths, they know the time is very close. And they think about all these things they've given up. I want you to think about this when you go visiting, when you visit at the VA. Maybe all the patients you're seeing are not dying, but maybe they're not ever going home again either. They have also given up so many things. I always feel so blessed when I walk into a sick room, knowing that I'm going to be able to walk out again. God is not going to ask me to make this many sacrifices that he's asking these dying people to make. And when you visit the dying person who has already given up all these things, suppose he never knew God to begin with. Suppose he's had to do this without the comfort of prayer and without the knowledge of the love of God. Can you pass up an opportunity to bring that word to him? You shouldn't ever pass up such an opportunity. You've got comfort in the tips of your fingers and the palms of your hand and the words of your mouth. And you must use them every day, every minute of your lives, in every way that you can. But even this last thing, you must crumple up and throw away. And you know, in the days to come, I'd like you to think about this exercise, and some of you will want to sit down and do it again when you're alone and you have time to think about it. Maybe it'll help you make the decision to do some of the things you've been planning to do and to stop doing some of the things you know you should stop doing. Get in touch with your feelings. This is partly what it's like to be dying. Now I'm going to go on to the next phase of care, And a phrase that I hear so often, and that you nurses will have heard so often too, the phrase is, "I hope he doesn't die on my shift." Nurses say that all the time, not because they're hard-hearted or uncaring, it's because they really hope he doesn't die on their shift. But if you are with a person who is dying, and you know that you're going to be there when he says his last words or takes his last breath, there are some things that you must remember. I'm talking now about you people who will not be family members. If you are a visitor or a nurse, not a close family member, and you are in the room when the patient dies, if it's your job, tell the family, get close to him, the end is very near, it's time to say goodbye. And when the heart has stopped, say, "I'm sorry, but your husband is dead." Not he has expired, not that he's gone to glory, even though you know he has. None of those things. "I'm sorry, your husband is dead." Saying dead makes it real. And the sooner you make it real, the sooner healing can begin. "I'm sorry, your husband is dead." And then get out of the way. Unless the family specifically ask you to stay in the room, leave the room and wait outside the door. Wait close by. Give the family a chance to do their final farewells. This body will never feel the same again when the funeral director gets through with it. This is the last chance the people who love this patient will have a chance to touch and to stroke and to kiss and to feel and to hurt, because it will never be the same again. Get back out of the way. You nurses, you're trained to want to do something and you know what you're supposed to do. And I'm asking you now, forget that. When the patient has died, get out of the way. Compose the body if you have to. Do as little as you possibly can and get out of the way. Often the family will ask you to stay. If you have been close to this patient, they'll say, "You're one of us now, you stay with us." And that's a privilege that you should be thankful for. When the family seems ready to leave the room, take them to a nearby place, an empty room, or to the chapel. Don't send them. People who have just lost a loved one are in shock. Often the shock doesn't show, but they are in shock. I've known lifelong smokers who forgot how to light a cigarette. When my husband died 5 weeks ago, I did not know how to dial the telephone. And I'm a strong person. I'm the lady who has the answers. I could not make the telephone work. Assume that the family are in shock. Take them to a tranquil place while they put themselves together. And a very important point I want to make right here is, however a family expresses its grief should be all right with you. There are no right and wrong ways to express grief. What is right for you may not be right for somebody else. Some cultures make a lot of noise when a person dies. Other cultures don't make any noise at all. But however the grief is expressed should be okay with you. Because if you show disapproval, or if you feel disapproval of the way other people are handling grief, you're going to show it either through your body language or through your tone of voice. And people in grief should not have to deal with your disapproval at this time. So however they express their grief is all right. You need to be supportive. Prayer is essential at a time like this. If you ever have the misfortune to deal with a family who don't believe in prayer and who don't believe in the church, you have my sympathy, because they're very difficult to deal with. But that's no reason why you can't pray inside yourself, as I do. Families often want to ask you about the last things that their loved one said. Bereaved people often want to know all the little details. What did he have for his last meal? What did he say that morning when he woke up? What did he say before he went to sleep? And this isn't trivial. It's a yearning that survivors have to know all these details. When my son died in Vietnam, I thought I would die with the pain of it, because They never found my son. There was just never anything to find. And I so much wanted to know, how did he spend his last day? All his belongings were destroyed with him, so there was nothing to send back to me. And I was so bereft, and I was hungry for somebody to tell me something about him. Just tell me. And you know, it wasn't until the US government, in its wisdom, brought back the unknown soldier from Vietnam that I began to heal. That's my son there, in that space in Washington. So we must never underestimate the value of ritual and ceremony, which are forms of prayer, really. They are very valuable to all of us. So be patient with families who ask seemingly unimportant questions. I've had nurses say, what difference does it make what he ate for breakfast? Well, it makes a lot of difference if his widow wants to know, doesn't it? And what harm is there in telling her? I teach emergency room nurses procedures, not only about emergency care, but how to deal with relatives who are in the waiting room of the emergency room. And I always advise nurses that even if the patient is dead on arrival, I say, please, make the body as presentable as you can, expose as much of the body as you can so that the person can be seen. If the body is mutilated from the accident and all that's presentable is one hand, I say cover the body and leave that hand outside of the sheet. And then go out into the waiting room and never say, your son has died. I recommend that these nurses go out and say, come in and say goodbye. Because it's terrible not to be there when somebody you care about dies. And you're doing a service for the living if you can tell this mother or this wife out there, come in and say goodbye. And they've got, maybe it's just the hand outside the sheet, but they can touch that and they can stroke that and they can hold on and they can say goodbye. And by doing that, you have helped that person's healing at this time, because you've said, come in and say goodbye. And that person has the feeling that that's what they did. And very rarely do they say, is he dead now? And if they do say that, you can say, yes, he is. And I have never had one ask me, well, how long has he been dead? Because relatives want to hold on to the fact that they were there, they said goodbye. And it's these little things that you can help the living cope with what's happened. One other word I'd like to say, too, is that if you have anything to say about it at all, never allow a close family member to be sedated right after a death. We sometimes think we're being very kind if we give the widow a shot of Valium to put her out for a few hours. And often doctors will have a hypodermic ready. They'll instruct the nurse, when he dies, give this to his wife. And they think they're being kind, and they are not. All they're doing is postponing the hurt. A case in point is a family that I had cared for, but I was ill myself at the time and couldn't be there when the man died. And when he died, his widow, who was only 26 years old, was given a very strong dose of sedative, and they took her to an empty room on the same floor and put her to bed. She went to sleep and slept for 7 hours. And while she was asleep, her husband's parents, his brothers and sisters, and her 2 children had already begun the grief process. They had already begun to say, do you remember when Tom fell out of the boat when we were fishing? Do you remember how mad Daddy got at Tom when such and such happened? Do you remember that crazy footstool Tom made for Mama in high school? They had begun their grieving process. But when the widow woke up, she was 7 hours behind and never did catch up with them. And all it meant was that she went through the grieving process alone. Because it was natural when she would say, do you remember when he made that crazy footstool? And somebody would say, yes, we talked about that last night. She's left out right there. Do you remember when he fell out of the boat? Yes, we talked about that last night. Brother Bill brought it up. They were cutting her off at every level. without meaning to. And consequently, to this day, she is grieving by herself because she never caught up. So I never allow a close relative to be sedated unless there's a medical reason for doing so. All you're doing is postponing the getting well part. Before you can get well, you have got to hurt. And putting off the hurt is no kindness. Bereaved people go through the same stages of grief, denial, no, I can't believe it's happened. Anger, why has God taken him from me? Why it's not fair. Bargaining, if only this hadn't happened, I would have done such and such. If only I had been there, if only I had done this or done that. Mothers are the ones who grieve the worst, especially mothers of young children. They always feel so guilty when a child dies. If I hadn't given him the bicycle for his birthday, he could never have ridden out in the road. If I hadn't been taking a nap, this wouldn't have happened. If I'd taken him to the doctor sooner, it wouldn't have happened. Why didn't I take his temperature that morning? Mothers really beat themselves to death with guilt. But the same stages do occur, and all that we can do for a person in grief is to hold them a lot and keep giving them words of reassurance. It will get better. You will feel better. You will come through this. They are really the only words that you should say. Please don't say, I know how you feel, because you really don't. The fact that your husband died doesn't necessarily mean that you felt the way I'm feeling now. How can I know that? I only know I hurt like the dickens. And I only know that I need your prayers. I think we should make a circle of prayer for each other. So don't say, I know how you feel. Truly, you will get better. It's going to be all right. And the most important words of all, I'm here for you. Not I'm here if you need me. Call me if you want me. I'm here for you. And if we will just do that for bereaved people, we'll be doing them a great service, because that's all that people in my position now need. I just need to be told it's going to be okay. And when I'm told it's going to work out, you'll be all right, you're hurting now, but it'll get better, then I can look, and this world is full of widows who made it. It's full of widows who hurt as much as we hurt, and they made it, and we'll make it. I guess what I'm asking you to do is love each other. And you already do that. I'm going to take about 5 more minutes, and I'm going to tell you another war story, so I hope you'll bear with me. But I think it explains, it sums up what I've been trying to talk to you about today. Back before World War II, I was a student in a very famous teaching hospital in London. And in my care was a foreign student who was dying of pneumonia. I hate to keep saying this, but penicillin hadn't been invented yet. And often pneumonia was a fatal disease, and this young man was seriously ill. And the doctor in charge said to me, when he goes to sleep, he will go into a coma and he'll never wake up again. Once he sleeps, he'll die. So give him as much attention as you can until he falls asleep. And the doctor went on his way. Well, the student had heard what the doctor said, and he was very afraid. And he held onto my hands and he said, oh, please, don't let me go to sleep. I don't want to die. I'm not ready to die. Don't let me go to sleep. Talk to me. Keep me awake. And I talked to him about everything I could think of. And each time I'd slow down, he'd pull on my hand some more and say, don't let me go to sleep. I don't want to die. Talk to me. Keep me awake. And I talked to him about everything under the sun. And finally, it was beginning to get light. And for the want of something to talk about, I said to him, just hold on a little longer. Dawn is coming up, and we're going to see another beautiful Sabbath day, and all the bells in London will ring. Just hold on, because the Sabbath is coming. Well, he did hold on, and he did get better, and he left the hospital, and I did not know what became of him. Well, now it's several years later, and I had been dropped into France 4 months before D-Day. I did not know when D-Day was going to take place. I only knew I had orders to follow in preparation for what was going to happen. And I was in this little town north of France where the officer in charge of the German garrison was a particularly brutal man. He used psychological warfare on the people of the town, and sometimes his methods were horrible. And one of the things he did was to close off both ends of a street. And he always did this during the noon hour when people were either at home having their 2-hour lunch period or they were on their way to and from home. Well, I was a pedestrian on a street one day when both ends of the street were closed off with tanks and trucks, and the troops poured out, and I knew that my time to die had come because I was carrying part of a transmitter. And I knew that when they found that, they really would use all their cruelty on me that they could think of. And it never occurred to me to pray to escape. All I prayed for was a quick death, because I knew what would happen to me once the Germans had hold of me. Well, the officer in charge ordered all his troops. Oh, and by the way, the people in the rest of the town were encouraged to go on about their business, which made what happened on the blocked-off street that much more horrible. But the officer in charge ordered all his troops into the even-numbered houses. The people in the odd-numbered houses were left alone. But the people in the even-numbered houses were herded out onto the sidewalk. Males were shot on their own doorsteps. Some mothers were made to kill their children. Some of the young girls were dragged off to the trucks, and the screaming and the gunfire and the smell of blood was just horrible. And I kept praying for a quick death. Well, the soldier who checked my ID was not happy with it, and he shoved me over in a group with some others who were going to be further questioned, and I kept praying, please God, let it be quick. Well, the screaming went on, and the gunfire went on, and it was just awful. And finally, a soldier came and got me, and he took me into a house where somebody was being badly beaten in the next room, and he shoved me into a room on the left. And he shoved me so hard that I lost my balance. Now, you must remember that I was an Englishwoman at a time when being an Englishwoman stood for something, and it was important to me not to fall to my knees. And he had shoved me hard, and I lost my balance, and I fought so hard to remain upright, and I did. And as I straightened up, I saw the shiniest pair of jackboots I have ever seen in my life, and standing in the jackboots was an SS officer who seemed to me to be 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide. He just filled the room, and they were fearsome to see, even under the best circumstances, in the black uniform with the lightning bolts on the collar and the death's head on the cap and a dagger on one side and a gun on the other. And as I straightened up and we looked at each other, we recognized each other immediately. It was my student from before the war. And he looked at me, and the soldier outside had hit me in the face with his rifle butt, and my cheekbone was smashed, and I had a gash in my eyebrow, and the side of my face was covered in blood. And he looked me over from head to foot and never changed his expression, and he reached back for the gun. And I sent up a prayer of thanksgiving. Oh, thank you, God, it's going to happen right here. And I prayed that his aim would be true. Didn't occur to me to pray for anything else. Just let his aim be true, and I'm going to die right here. Thank you, God. But his hand went on past the gun, and he came up with a snow-white handkerchief. And he reached out and he mopped at some of the blood on my face. And again, without changing his expression, he said, "Go, I give you back your Sabbath." And he had one of the soldiers take me to the end of the street and turn me loose. And as I tried to become invisible in the gathering darkness, I realized something I have always known, and that is that each life is like a pebble that's thrown into a pond. It makes ripples that touch parts of the shore we don't even know about. Each life is like that pebble. our lives touch people that maybe we'll never meet. And so it is up to each one of us to walk through this life in such a way that no person is diminished because our lives touch his. And I don't know how better a way you can make your ripples count than by being soldiers of the Lord and taking prayer and comfort to the dying in your community. I thank you for the privilege of talking to you, and I hope to speak with many of you before I leave. Thank you.